Every night you look up and see one moon. But what if ancient humans saw two? Hello there, and welcome to this quiet corner, where time slows down and curiosity is allowed to drift without hurry. Tonight we're not staying in the world as you know it, we're stepping into a version of Earth that might have been, or perhaps in some forgotten chapter of deep time, actually was. This is the story of two moons, not the single pale disk we've always known, but a sky shared by twin sentinels, each pulling at the tides, each casting its own shadow, each singing its own gravitational song across the surface of our planet. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in, maybe dim the lights if you can, let the day fall away, because this journey requires a certain kind of attention, the slow kind, the kind that doesn't rush toward answers but lets questions unfold like flowers in the dark. We're going to imagine a world that feels both familiar and impossibly strange, a world where the night sky told a different story, where ancient peoples looked up and saw not one guiding light but two. And we're going to ask what that might have meant, not just for the tides or the calendar, but for the myths we told, the gods we invented, and the way we understood our place beneath the stars. The first thing you need to know is that this isn't entirely fiction. Our moon, the one we see every night, wasn't always alone. In fact, there's growing evidence that in the very early days of the solar system, Earth may have had a second moon, a smaller companion, a twin sibling born from the same cosmic violence that created the moon itself. Scientists call this the two-moon hypothesis, and while it remains debated, the idea is rooted in something real, in measurements, in craters, in the strange asymmetry of the moon's surface that has puzzled astronomers for decades. But tonight we're not here to debate the science alone. We're here to imagine, to stand on an ancient shore and look up at a sky split by two luminous bodies, to feel the tides rise and fall in rhythms no modern human has ever known, to hear the stories that might have been whispered around fires under a double moon, and to wonder what it would mean, truly mean, if the night had never been as simple as we think. So let's begin, not with telescopes or equations, but with a single human standing on a beach 4 billion years ago. The sand is warm beneath bare feet, the air smells of salt and something older, something volcanic. And overhead, hanging in the blackness like two unblinking eyes, are the moons, a second witness, a second light. And as the waves crash and the wind stirs, the world beneath those moons is already beginning to be shaped by their presence in ways no single satellite could ever achieve. The story of how Earth came to have a moon at all is one of the most dramatic events in the history of our planet. About 4.5 billion years ago, not long after the Earth itself had formed from the swirling dust and gas of the early solar system, something catastrophic happened. A Mars-sized object, which scientists have named Theia, collided with the young Earth in a glancing blow so powerful it nearly tore both bodies apart. The impact sent debris, molten rock, vaporized metal spinning out into space. Some of it fell back to Earth, some of it escaped into the void, but a significant portion remained in orbit, a ring of shattered material circling the planet like the rings of Saturn, but far more chaotic, far more violent. Over time, perhaps only a few thousand years, this debris began to clump together. Gravity pulled the fragments into larger and larger masses, and eventually those masses merged into a single object. The moon, our moon, born not from the slow accumulation of dust like the planets, but from fire and collision, from the wreckage of two worlds becoming one. It's a violent origin, but also a strangely beautiful one. The moon is, in a very real sense, part of the Earth. It's made from the same material, the same ancient rock that once formed the outer layers of our planet before the impact scattered it into the sky. But here's where the story takes a turn, because the debris ring that formed the moon didn't necessarily produce just one object. In fact, recent simulations suggest that the same process could have created two moons, a larger one, the moon we know, and a smaller companion, perhaps a third of its size, orbiting at a slightly different distance. For millions, perhaps tens of millions of years, these two bodies would have shared the sky, each following its own path, each exerting its own gravitational influence on the molten, cooling Earth below. If this smaller moon existed, and the evidence increasingly suggests it did, then for a brief window in Earth's early history, our planet had two moons. Not forever, not even for very long by geological standards, but long enough to shape the young planet in subtle ways, long enough to alter the tides, to stabilize the rotation of the Earth, and possibly even to influence the development of the early atmosphere and oceans. And then, as mysteriously as it appeared, the second moon vanished, not because it drifted away into space, but because it came back, because it collided with its larger sibling in a slow, inexorable merging that astronomers now believe explains one of the moon's most puzzling features. You see, the moon's surface is not uniform. One side, the near side, the one we always see from Earth, is relatively smooth, covered in dark plains of ancient lava that we call maria, or seas. But the far side, the side that always faces away from us, is rugged, mountainous, thickly cratered. For decades, scientists struggled to explain this asymmetry. Why would one hemisphere be so different from the other? And then someone proposed an answer. What if the far side of the moon isn't just older or more heavily cratered? What if it's the result of a collision? What, millions of years after the moon formed, its smaller twin destabilized by gravitational interactions, slowly spiraled inward and collided with the larger moon in a low-speed impact that didn't shatter either body, but instead plastered the smaller moon across the surface of the larger one, like a layer of clay? This would explain the strange highlands of the far side. It would explain the uneven distribution of, it would even explain certain chemical signatures found in lunar rock samples brought back by the Apollo missions. The two moons didn't survive separately, they merged, and in doing so, they erased almost all evidence of the second moon's existence, leaving only a ghostly imprint on the surface of the one that remained. But for a time, for millions of years, there were two, and if we could travel back to that ancient Earth, to stand on its shores and look up, we would see them both. We would live under a double moon, and the world would be different because of.
Now imagine that world. Not the Earth of today, but a much younger planet. The surface is still cooling from the violence of its formation. Volcanoes dot the landscape, sending plumes of ash and gas into a thick, hazy atmosphere. There are no continents yet, no familiar shapes of land, just scattered islands of rock rising from a global ocean that is slowly condensing from the steam that once filled the sky. The water is hot, almost boiling in places, and the air is heavy with carbon dioxide and sulfur. It's a hostile world, a world where life, if it exists at all, is only beginning to stir in the dark, mineral-rich depths of the sea. But above this chaos, the sky is clear, and every night, as the young Earth rotates, two moons rise. The first, our familiar moon, large and bright, dominates the sky. It hangs low on the horizon at first, a pale disk that seems impossibly close, far closer than it appears today. Because the moon in those early days was much nearer to the Earth, perhaps only 20,000 kilometers away, compared to the 84,000 kilometers that separate us now. It would have appeared enormous, filling the sky with a light so bright that even the darkest night would have felt like twilight. You could have walked by its light, you could have seen colors in its glow, and then trailing behind or perhaps leading ahead depending on where they were in their orbits, the second moon would appear. Smaller, fainter, but still unmistakable. It wouldn't have had a name. Not yet, because there were no humans to name it. But if there had been, if somehow we could have stood there and watched, we might have called it the companion, or the shadow, or the little sister. It would have moved more quickly across the sky than the larger moon, completing its orbit in perhaps only a few days, and together the two moons would have created a spectacle unlike anything visible from Earth today. Some nights they would rise together, one following the other like a pair of luminous guardians. Other nights, they would be on opposite sides of the sky, one setting as the other rose, dividing the darkness into two separate realms of light. And on rare occasions they would align, one passing in front of the other, creating an eclipse within an eclipse, a shadow within a shadow, a moment of celestial geometry that would have been breathtaking to witness, if only there had been eyes to see it. But the effects of these two moons went far beyond the visual, because each moon exerts a gravitational pull on the Earth, and when you have two moons, those pulls interact. Sometimes they reinforce each other, creating tides far stronger than anything we experience today. Other times they cancel out, creating periods of unusual calm. The rhythm of the tides would have been complex, almost chaotic, with high tides and low tides arriving at unpredictable intervals, driven by the constantly shifting positions of the two moons. The oceans would have surged and retreated in ways that made patterns difficult to predict, and any life trying to adapt to the intertidal zones would have faced a constantly changing environment. And there's something else. The Earth's rotation, its day-night cycle, would have been affected too, because the gravitational pull of the moons doesn't just move water, it also exerts a drag on the Earth itself, slowing its rotation over time. With two moons, this effect would have been amplified. The day might have been shorter or longer, depending on the specifics of the orbit. The axial tilt of the Earth, the tilt that gives us our seasons, might have been less stable, wobbling more dramatically, as the two moons tugged at the planet from different directions. In short, the Earth beneath a double moon would have been a more dynamic, more unstable world, constantly adjusting to the gravitational dance happening above it. But let's step forward in time. Millions of years, the second moon, its orbit slowly decaying, begins to drift closer to its larger sibling. The collision is inevitable, written into the mathematics of their orbits. One day, perhaps over the course of a few hours or a few days, the smaller moon falls into the larger one. The impact is slow by cosmic standards, more of a merging than a crash. There's no explosion, no shower of debris, just two bodies becoming one, their surfaces flowing together like molten wax. The smaller moon's crust spreading across the far side of the larger one, creating the highlands and mountains we see today. And when it's over, when the dust settles and the moon's new unified surface cools, the sky is different. There is only one moon now. The companion is gone, and the Earth, though it doesn't know it, has lost something it will never get back. But the story doesn't end, because even after the second moon vanished, its influence might have lingered. In myths, in memories, in the strange, persistent human belief that the night sky was once different, once fuller, once watched over by more than one celestial guardian. Every culture on Earth has moon myth, stories about where the moon came from, why it waxes and wanes, what it means when it eclipses the sun. These myths are universal, appearing in every corner of the world, from the deserts of Australia to the forests of Scandinavia to the mountains of South America. And while most of them focus on a single moon, there are hints, scattered through the oldest stories, of something more. References to a lost moon, a stolen moon, a moon that fell from the sky or was swallowed by darkness. These stories are often dismissed as metaphorical, as symbolic representations of other phenomena, cycles of time, the changing seasons, the passage of generations. But what if some of them remember something what if, buried deep in the oldest layers of human memory, there is a faint echo of a time when the sky held two moons? Consider the myths of the Polynesian islands. In many of these stories there are two celestial beings, often depicted as siblings or twins, who govern the night. One is the moon as we know it. The other is a shadowy figure, sometimes described as the moon's companion, sometimes as its rival. In some versions of the myth, the second figure is defeated or hidden, banished to the underworld or dissolved into the stars. The details vary from island to island, but the structure is consistent. There were two, now there is one, and the loss is mourned. Or look at the myths of ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations to leave written records, told stories of a time before time, when the gods created the heavens and set the celestial bodies in motion. In some fragments of these stories there are references to the moons, plural, as if it were understood that more than one moon once existed. Later scribes corrected these texts, changing moons to moon, assuming it was an error. But what if it was? What if the Sumerians, whose astronomical observations were remarkably precise, were recording something they had inherited from even older stories, stories passed down through countless generations from a time when human memory stretched back further than we can imagine? Even in Greek mythology there are hints. Selene, the goddess of the moon, is often depicted with a sister, sometimes named Pasaya, who is associated with darker, more mysterious aspects of the night. In some myths, Passaius said to have been cast into shadow or hidden from sight, leaving Selene to rule the sky alone. These stories are usually interpreted as allegories about the phases of the moon, the way it hides and reveals itself over the course of a month. But what if they're also, in some distant, distorted way, memories of a second moon, a smaller, fainter light that once accompanied Selene across the heavens but is now gone, leaving only Selene's solitary glow? It's impossible to prove, of course. Myths are not historical records. They're shaped by culture, by language, by the needs of the people who tell them. They change over time, accumulating new meanings, shedding old ones. But the persistence of these twin moon motifs, scattered across cultures that had no contact with each other, is striking. And it raises a question that's hard to dismiss. What if humanity's oldest stories, the ones told before writing, before cities, before agriculture, carried within them a memory of the sky as it once was? Not a literal memory, not a record preserved in words, but something deeper, a feel, an intuition, a sense that the night was once fuller, once stranger, once watched over by more than one silent companion. And if that's true, if even a fragment of that memory survived into the age of storytelling, then the second moon isn't entirely lost. It lives on, faint and distorted, in the myths we've told for thousands of years, a ghost in the stories, a shadow in the collective unconscious, a reminder that the world was not always as it is now, and that the sky, like everything else, has a history we're only beginning to understand. Now let's take a step further into imagination. Let's ask not what happened in the distant past, but what could happen. What if Earth still had two moons today, not billions of years ago but now, right now? What if instead of one pale disk rising in the east each night, there were two? How would that change us? How would it change the world? First, the obvious, the tides. With two moons, the oceans would behave very differently. Instead of the regular predictable rise and fall we experience twice a day, driven by the single moon's gravity, we'd have a far more complex tidal system. Sometimes the two moons would align, their gravitational pulls reinforcing each other, creating what we might call super tides, massive surges of water that could flood coastlines and reshape shorelines with every cycle. Other times the moons would be positioned at right angles to each other, their pulls partially canceling out, creating neat tides far calmer than anything we see today. The rhythm would be harder to predict, more chaotic, and coastal communities would have to adapt to a constantly shifting ocean, one that couldn't be tamed by simple tide tables.
Navigation, especially for early sailors, would have been profoundly affected. For thousands of years, humans have used the moon to navigate at sea, to measure time, to mark the passage of seasons. A single moon provides a reliable cycle, roughly 29.5 days from new moon to new moon. A cycle that cultures around the world built their calendars around. But with two moons, each with its own cycle, the night sky would be far more complicated. Sailors would have to track two separate lunar calendars, learning when the moons aligned, when they opposed each other, and how those configurations affected the tides. It would require a deeper knowledge of astronomy, a more sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, and it's likely that cultures would have developed entirely different systems of timekeeping, perhaps dividing the year not into months based on one moon, but into more complex cycles, based on the interactions between two. Then there's the impact on life itself. Many species on Earth are deeply attuned to the lunar cycle. Sea turtles use the moon to navigate when they hatch, making their way from the beach to the ocean under its light. Certain types of plankton synchronize their reproductive cycles with the full moon, creating massive blooms that feed entire ocean ecosystems. Even humans are affected. Our sleep patterns influenced by the brightness of the moonlight, our moods subtly shifted by the lunar phases. With two moons, all of this would be different. Some species might adapt, developing the ability to respond to both moons, using the alignment of the two as a signal for migration or reproduction. Others might struggle, confused by the conflicting signals, their ancient rhythms disrupted by the presence of a second light in the sky. And then there's the simple, undeniable beauty of it. Imagine standing on a hilltop on a clear night, looking up at a sky where two moons hang side by side, one large and luminous, the other smaller and more delicate, like a pearl beside a lantern.
The shadows they cast would be doubled, creating strange layered patterns on the ground. Two sets of light and dark interweaving in ways our eyes have never seen. On nights when both moons were full, the world would be bathed in a silvery brightness, almost as bright as dawn, bright enough to read by, bright enough to see colors. And on nights when both were new, when both moons hid their faces, the darkness would be deeper, more absolute, and the stars would blaze with a clarity we rarely experience today. Artists would paint different pictures, poets would write different verses. The very language we use to describe the night might be richer, more layered, because the night itself would be more complex. We might have different words for the kinds of moonlight. One word for the light of the larger moon, another for the smaller, a third for the light they create together when they align. And in our myths, in our religions, the two moons would undoubtedly take on different symbolic meaning. Perhaps one would represent reason, the other intuition, one the conscious mind, the other the unconscious, one the seen world, the other the unseen. The duality of the moons would seep into our philosophy, our art, our understanding of the self. But there's also a darker possibility, because while two moons might create beauty and complexity, they could also create instability. The gravitational interactions between two moons, especially if they're close in size, can be unpredictable. Orbits can decay, collisions can happen, and if the second moon were on an unstable trajectory, it might eventually fall, not into the first moon, but into the Earth itself. Imagine the catastrophe of a moon-sized object striking the planet. The impact would be apocalyptic, dwarfing even the asteroid that killed the dinosaur. It would vaporize the impact site, send shockwaves around the globe, fill the atmosphere with debris that would block out the sun for years. Life, especially complex life, might not survive. And so the presence of a second moon, while beautiful, would also carry with it a constant looming threat, a reminder that the sky is not fixed, that the celestial dance is ongoing, and that what rises must eventually fall. This is the tension at the heart of the two-moon scenario. It's a world of greater beauty, greater complexity, but also greater risk. A world where the night sky is never simple, where the tides are never predictable, and where the forces that shape the planet are always in flux. It's a world that would challenge us, inspire us, and perhaps ultimately humble us, reminding us that we live on a planet governed by forces far beyond our control, forces that are ancient, powerful, and indifferent to our existence. So as we drift through this thought experiment, as we imagine the double moons rising and setting, casting their twin lights across the land and sea, we're not just playing with science. We're exploring what it means to live under a sky that's different. We're asking how much of our identity, our culture, our sense of place in the universe, is shaped by something as simple and profound as the number of moons in the sky. And the answer, it turns out, is quite a lot. Because the moon or moons are more than just objects in space. They're anchored, they're mirrors, they're reminders that we are not separate from the cosmos, but part of it, shaped by it, held in its gravitational embrace. And whether there's one moon or two, the sky above us is a story we're still learning to read. Let's go deeper now, into the physics, the mechanics of what two moons would actually mean, not just poetically, but practically. Because the universe doesn't care about our myths or our metaphors, it operates according to laws, strict and unforgiving laws of gravity and motion. And when you add a second moon to the equation, those laws produce effects that ripple outward, touching everything from the length of the day to the stability of the climate, to the very shape of the planet itself. Start with the Earth's rotation. Right now the moon acts as a stabilizer. Its gravitational pull creates a slight bulge in the Earth's shape, a tidal bulge, that follows the moon as it orbits. This bulge exerts a drag on the Earth's rotation, slowly, almost imperceptibly slowing it down. Billions of years ago, a day on Earth was only a few hours long. Over time, the moon's influence stretched those hours into the 24-hour day we know today. It's a gradual process, gaining about 1.7 milliseconds per century, but it's constant and it's cumulative. Eventually, millions of years from now, the Earth's day will lengthen to match the moon's orbital period, a phenomenon called tidal locking, where one side of the Earth would always face the moon, just as one side of the moon always faces us. Now add a second moon. Suddenly, the mathematics become far more complicated. If the second moon is smaller and orbits faster, it exerts its own drag, but in a different rhythm. The two tidal bulges,
one from each moon would interfere with each other, sometimes reinforcing, sometimes canceling. The result would be a less predictable, less stable rotational period. The Earth might slow down faster in some eras and slower in others, depending on the alignment of the two moons. And if the orbits were significantly different, the Earth might experience a wobble, a variation in its rotation that could have subtle but profound effects on climate and weather patterns. Then there's axial tilt. The Earth is tilted at about 23.5 degrees relative to its orbital plane around the Sun. This tilt is why we have seasons. It's also remarkably stable, thanks in part to the Moon's gravitational influence, which dampens the wobble that might otherwise occur. Without the Moon or with a much smaller Moon, the Earth's tilt could vary wildly over time, swinging from nearly upright to almost horizontal. This would create extreme climate shifts, with some eras having almost no seasonal variation, and others experiencing brutal exaggerated seasons, where summers scorched the poles and winters buried the equator in ice. With two moons, the stability of this tilt would depend on the specifics of their orbits. If both moons orbited in the same plane and in the same direction, they might reinforce each other's stabilizing effect, making the Earth's tilt even more constant. But if their orbits were misaligned, if one moon orbited at an angle to the other, the competing gravitational pulls could destabilize the tilt, causing it to oscillate over thousands or millions of years. The result would be a planet with a less predictable climate, where ice ages and warm periods came and went more frequently, driven not just by orbital variations, but by the complex dance of the two moons. There's also the question of eclipse. Right now, solar eclipses occur when the Moon passes directly between the Earth and the Sun, blocking the Sun's light and casting a shadow on the Earth's surface. It's a rare and dramatic event, one that has inspired awe and fear throughout human history. With two moons, eclipses would be far more frequent, but also far more varied. You could have an eclipse caused by the larger moon, a total eclipse that plunges the landscape into darkness, or you could have an eclipse caused by the smaller moon, a partial eclipse that dims the sun but doesn't block it completely. And on very rare occasions, you might have both moons aligning at the same time, creating a double eclipse, a layered shadow where the smaller moon's silhouette is framed by the larger moon's shadow. It would be a spectacle unlike anything visible from Earth today, a reminder of the intricate celestial mechanics playing out overhead. And then there are the tides. We've touched on this already, but it's worth diving deeper because the tides are one of the most direct and dramatic ways the moons influence the Earth. Right now, the tides are governed primarily by the Moon with a smaller contribution from the Sun. The Moon's gravity pulls on the Earth's oceans, creating two bulges of water, one on the side of the Earth facing the Moon and one on the opposite side. As the Earth rotates, these bulges move, creating the high and low tides we experience roughly twice a day.
With two moons, this simple system becomes vastly more complex. The second moon would create its own set of tidal bulges, and these bulges would interact with those created by the first moon. When the two moons are aligned, on the same side of the Earth, their gravitational pulls add together, creating what we might call a spring tide, but far more extreme than any spring tide we see today. The oceans would rise to unprecedented heights, flooding low-lying areas and creating powerful currents. Coastal ecosystems would be reshaped by these surges, and any species living in the intertidal zone would have to adapt to periods of extreme inundation. When the two moons are on opposite sides of the Earth, their pulls would partially cancel out, creating unusually calm tides. But when they're at right angles to each other, the interactions become even stranger. The tidal bulges from each moon would pull in different directions, creating complex patterns of water movement that could generate unusual currents, eddies, and waves. Navigating these waters would require deep knowledge and careful observation, and it's likely that cultures living near the coast would develop sophisticated systems for predicting and responding to the ever-changing tides. But the effects of two moons wouldn't be limited to the ocean. The solid Earth itself experiences tides, though they're much smaller and harder to detect. The moon's gravity pulls on the crust, causing it to flex and bulge by a few centimeters. This is called the Earth tide, and while it's not something we can feel, it has measurable effects on geological processes. With two moons, these Earth tides would be more pronounced, and the constant flexing and relaxing of the crust could influence volcanic activity, earthquake frequency,
and the movement of tectonic plates, it's possible that a two-moon Earth would be more geologically active, with more frequent eruptions and quakes, as the crust is constantly stressed by the competing gravitational pulls. The presence of two moons would change how we perceive time. For most of human history, the moon has been our primary timekeeper. Its phases, from new moon to full moon and back again, provided a natural calendar, a way to divide the year into manageable chunks. Cultures around the world developed lunar calendars, and even today, many of our months are roughly based on the moon's cycle. But with two moons, each with its own cycle, timekeeping would become far more complex. Imagine trying to create a calendar when one moon completes its cycle every 29 days and the other every 15 days. Cultures would have to decide which moon to prioritize, or they might develop entirely new systems that tracked both. There might be two parallel calendars, one for each moon used for different purposes. The larger moon might govern religious festivals and agricultural cycles, while the smaller moon marked shorter intervals, perhaps weeks or fortnights. And on the rare occasions when both moons were full at the same time, it might be considered a special event, a convergence worth celebrating or fearing. This complexity would seep into language and culture. We might have different words for different kinds of months, one word for the cycle of the larger moon, another for the smaller. The concept of a fortnight, a period of 2 weeks, might take on new significance if it corresponded to the cycle of the smaller moon. And the alignment of the two moons might be seen as auspicious or ominous, a time when the boundaries between worlds grew thin, when magic was stronger, when the tides of fate turned. In this way, the two moons would shape not just the physical world, but the mental landscape, the way we think about time, cycles, and the passage of days. So when we ask what if Earth had two moons, we're not just asking about astronomy, we're asking about history, culture, psychology. We're asking how much of what we are is shaped by the sky above us, and how different we might be if that sky were different, not just in our myths or our calendars, but in the very rhythms of our lives, in the way we navigate the world, in the way we understand our place in the cosmos. The second moon, even if it existed only in imagination, reminds us that the world is not fixed, that the sky is not unchanging, and that the forces that shape us are older and stranger than we often realize. Now let's imagine us not in the distant past or the far future, but in a kind of alternate now, a world just like ours, except for one thing. When the sun sets tonight, two moons will rise. You're standing on a beach, the sand is cool beneath your feet, and the air smells of salt and seaweed. The waves roll in with a rhythm that feels almost musical, but not quite regular. There's a pattern to them, but it's complex, layered, as if two different songs are playing at once and you're hearing the harmony. The first moon appears on the eastern horizon, large and luminous, just as it always has. It climbs slowly, pulling itself free from the edge of the world, and its light spills across the water in a shimmering path. But tonight there's something else. About 10 degrees to the south, a second moon rises. It's smaller, perhaps half the size of the first, but still bright enough to cast its own light, its own shadow. And as the two moons climb higher, the beach is bathed in a double glow, a layered luminescence that makes everything look slightly unreal, slightly dreamlike. You watch the waves, trying to understand their rhythm. The larger moon pulls the water toward it, creating a bulge that travels around the planet as the Earth rotates. But the smaller moon pulls too, and its rhythm is faster, more insistent. The waves rise and fall, but not in the simple, predictable pattern you're used to. Sometimes they surge higher, driven by the combined pull of both moons. Other times they calm, as the two moons work against each other. It's like watching a conversation between two forces, each with its own voice, each influencing the other. You look, the two moons are climbing higher now, moving across the sky at slightly different speeds. The larger moon is steady, stately, moving with the slow grace of something ancient and unchanged. The smaller moon is quicker, almost playful, darting ahead and then falling behind, as if it's circling its larger companion. In a few hours they'll both be high overhead, and the beach will be so bright you'll be able to see colors in the sand, read the lines on a book if you wanted to. But for now they're still rising, still finding their places in the night. And as you stand there watching the double moon rise, you realize something. This isn't just a different sky, it's a different world. The tides are different. The nights are different. The way time flows, the way stories are told, the way people understand the passage of days and months and years, all of it is shaped by those two lights overhead. And you standing here in this alternate now, are shaped by them too. You don't know how, not exactly, but you can feel it. In the rhythm of the waves, in the shadows at your feet, in the way the night feels both familiar and utterly strange. Imagine living your whole life under a sky like this. Imagine never knowing a night with only one moon. For you the double moons would be normal, unremarkable, as ordinary as the sun. You wouldn't marvel at them any more than you marvel at the stars. They would just be there, constant and reliable, the way things have always. But every now and then, maybe on a night like this one, when the moons are perfectly positioned and the light is just right, you might stop and look up and feel a flicker of wonder, a sense that the sky is not empty, not silent, but alive with forces you don't fully understand. And in that moment you would be connected, across time and space, to every other person who has ever stood beneath a moon, or moons, and looked up and asked, what is that? And what does it mean? Because that's the question, isn't it? But what would it mean? And the answer is that it would mean everything. It would mean different tides, different myths, different rhythms of life. It would mean a sky that's more complex, a world that's less predictable, a sense that we live in a universe where the rules are negotiable, where the boundaries are blurred, where the line between the possible and the impossible is thinner than we think. And maybe, in some deep half-forgotten corner of our collective memory, we do remember. Maybe the myths of twin gods and lost moons aren't just stories. Maybe they're echoes. Maybe somewhere in the oldest layers of human consciousness, there's a memory of a time when the sky was different, when the night held more than one light, when we lived, if only briefly, under two moons. And maybe that memory, faint and distorted as it is, shapes us still, in the stories we tell, in the dreams we have, in the strange persistent feeling that the world is not quite as it should be, that something is missing, that there was once more to the sky than what we see now. This is the power of the two-moon question. It's not just a scientific puzzle or a thought experiment. It's a doorway into deeper questions about identity, memory, and the nature of reality itself. Because if the sky can change, if the world can be different, then what else might be possible? What else might we have forgotten? And what might we remember if we look closely enough, if we listen carefully enough, if we let ourselves wonder? So let's keep wondering. Let's keep looking up, because the story of the two moons isn't over. It's still unfolding, still waiting to be told. And in telling it, we're not just imagining a different world, we're exploring our own, seeing it from a new angle, asking how much of what we take for granted is actually contingent, fragile, open to change. The two moons, real or imagined, are a mirror, and what they reflect is not just the sky, but ourselves. Now let's turn our attention to the creatures that might have lived beneath those two moons, because if the physical world would be different, shaped by complex tides and unstable days, then the living world would be different too. Evolution doesn't happen in a vacuum. It responds to the environment, to the pressures and opportunities that environment creates. And under a double moon, those pressures would be unique. Consider the intertidal zone, the narrow strip of coastline where land meets sea, where the ocean surges and retreats with every tide. This is one of the most dynamic, most challenging environments on Earth. Organisms that live here must be able to survive both underwater and exposed to air, enduring the pounding of waves and the drying heat of the sun. They're specialists, adapted to a rhythm that's dictated by the moon's cycle. Barnacles, mussels, crabs, sea anemones, they've all evolved strategies to cope with the regular rise and fall of the tides. But with two moons, the tides wouldn't be regular. They'd be chaotic, driven by the interplay of two celestial bodies with different cycles. Sometimes the tides would be extreme, flooding areas that are normally dry. Other times they'd be unusually calm, leaving areas exposed that are normally submerged. For organisms trying to adapt to this environment, the challenge would be immense. They couldn't rely on a predictable rhythm. They'd have to be flexible, able to respond to rapid changes, able to survive in conditions that varied wildly from one day to the next. One possibility is that life in the intertidal zone would be more diverse, with different species specialized for different tidal conditions. Some might thrive during the extreme high tides, taking advantage of the deep water to feed and reproduce. Others might be adapted to the calm periods, using the stability to anchor themselves and grow. And there might be generalists, organisms capable of surviving in both extremes, though perhaps not thriving in either. The result would be a rich, complex ecosystem, constantly shifting as the tides changed, with no single species dominating for long.
Another possibility is that life in the intertidal zone would be less abundant. The constant upheaval, the lack of predictability, might simply be too much for most organisms to handle. Instead of a bustling ecosystem, you might find a sparse, hardy community of survivors, organisms that have sacrificed specialization for resilience, able to endure almost anything but unable to compete effectively when conditions are stable. This would create a different kind of coastline, one that's less teeming with life, more barren, more desolate, but also more dynamic, constantly being reshaped by the forces of the two moons. Then there are the creatures of the open ocean. Many marine animals time their reproductive cycles to the lunar phases. Corals, for example, spawn en masse during full moons, releasing eggs and sperm into the water in a synchronized event that maximizes the chances of fertilization. Sea turtles lay their eggs on beaches during certain lunar phases, guided by the brightness of the moonlight. Fish, squid, and plankton all have behaviors tied to the moon's cycle. With two moons, these behaviors would have to change. Some species might synchronize their reproduction to the larger moon, ignoring the smaller one. Others might respond to both, creating two separate spawning events each cycle. And some might synchronize to the alignment of the two moons, reproducing only when both are full or both are new, creating rare but intense bursts of activity. Over time, this could lead to speciation, with populations diverging based on which lunar cues they follow, eventually becoming distinct species with different reproductive strategies. On land, the effects might be more subtle but no less profound. Many animals are influenced by the light of the moon. Nocturnal predators hunt by moonlight. Prey animals hide during full moons to avoid being seen. Migratory birds use the moon's position to navigate. With two moons, the night would rarely be truly dark, and the patterns of light would be more complex. Predators might have an advantage, able to hunt more effectively under the double illumination, or prey might evolve better camouflage, better senses, ways to detect danger even in the brightness of a double moon. The balance between predator and prey would shift, and over generations, the shapes and behaviors of animals would change in response. And then there are human, or rather the human ancestors who might have evolved under a double moon. With two moons, our ancestors would have needed to develop more sophisticated astronomical knowledge, learning to track both moons, to predict their alignments, to understand the complex cycles that govern the tides and the season. This might have driven the development of abstract thinking, of mathematics, of the ability to hold multiple patterns in mind at once. In this sense, the two moons might have made us smarter, pushing us toward greater cognitive complexity out of sheer necessity. Or it might have done the opposite. The unpredictability of the two-moon system might have made planning impossible, forcing early humans to live more in the moment, responding to immediate conditions rather than anticipating future cycles. This could have delayed the development of agriculture, of settled communities, of civilization itself, because agriculture depends on predictability, on knowing when to plant and when to harvest, and those timings are often governed by the lunar calendar. With two moons, those calendars would be far more complex, and it might have taken us longer, perhaps much longer, to figure them out. But let's not get too caught up in speculation. The point is that life in all its forms would be shaped by the presence of two moons. From the smallest plankton to the largest whales, from the simplest barnacle to the most complex primate, every organism would bear the mark of that double light. And in imagining that world, we're reminded that evolution is not a straight line, not a march toward some predetermined goal. It's a response, a constant adaptation to whatever the environment throws at it. Change the environment, even in a subtle way, and the entire tree of life branches differently. The two moons, if they existed, wouldn't just change the sky, they'd change everything beneath it. So as we drift through this imagined world, as we watch the double moons rise and set, as we feel the complex tides pull and push, we're not just playing with physics, we're exploring the deep interconnectedness of all things. The way the sky shapes the land shapes the ocean shapes life, and life in turn shapes itself in response to all of it. It's a system, vast and intricate,
and the two moons are just one part of it. But they're a part that touches everything else, that ripples outward in ways we can measure and ways we can only guess at. And in recognizing that, we see our own world a little more clearly. We see how much we depend on the stability of the sky, the predictability of the tides, the constancy of the single moon, and we appreciate perhaps for the first time how fragile and how fortunate that stability is. Let's shift now, from the physical to the cultural, from the measurable to the meaningful, because a world with two moons wouldn't just be different in its tides and its days, it would be different in its stories, its religions, its entire understanding of the cosmos. The sky shapes not just the body but the mind, and when the sky holds two moons instead of one, the mind that develops beneath it is a different kind of mind, one that sees patterns where we see simplicity, that finds meaning in alignments and eclipses, that constructs entire cosmologies around the dance of twin light. Imagine for a moment a civilization developing under a double moon. Perhaps it's an ancient civilization, thousands of years in the past, before writing, before cities, when humans lived in small bands, moving with the seasons, following the herd. These people look up every night and see two moons. They've never known anything different. To them, the double moon is as natural as the sun, as unremarkable as the stars, but that doesn't mean they ignore it. Quite the opposite. The two moons become the center of their world, the framework around which they organize their lives, their beliefs, their understanding of how things work. The larger moon, bright and constant, might be seen as a father figure, a king, a protector. It rises in the east and sets in the west with steady, predictable grace. It governs the long cycles, the turning of the seasons, the rhythm of planting and harvest. The people watch it carefully, noting when it waxes full and when it wanes to nothing, marking these phases with rituals, with festivals, with stories told around the fire. This is the moon of order, of structure, of the smaller moon, faster and more erratic, might be seen as a child, a trickster, a spirit. It dances across the sky, sometimes ahead of its larger companion, sometimes behind, sometimes disappearing entirely for days at a time before reappearing in a different part of the heaven. It governs the short cycles, the daily rhythms, the unpredictable events. When the two moons align, when they rise together or set together, it's a time of power, a moment when the boundary between the earthly and the divine grows thin. Shamans perform ceremony. Hunters set out on important quests. Marriages are consecrated, because the alignment is rare, and rarity breeds significance. But what happens when the moons oppose each other, when one rises as the other sets, dividing the sky into two realms? This might be seen as a time of tension, of balance, of negotiation between opposing forces. The people might believe that during these times the world is more fragile, more susceptible to chaos. They might avoid making important decisions, might stay close to home, might perform rituals to maintain harmony between the two moons, and by extension between the dualities they represent. Over generations, these beliefs would crystallize into mythology. Stories would be told about the origins of the two moons. Perhaps they were once a single entity, a primordial being that split in two at the dawn of creation. Or perhaps they were lovers, separated by fate but doomed to chase each other across the sky for eternity. Or perhaps they were rivals, locked in a cosmic struggle for dominance, with the earth caught between them. The details would vary from culture to culture, but the fundamental structure would be the same. The two moons are not just objects, they're actors in a drama that plays out above us every night, and by watching them, by interpreting their movements, we can understand something about the world and our place in it. And as these cultures grew more sophisticated, as they developed agriculture and writing and cities, the two moons would become even more central to their worldview. Calendars would be constructed around the complex interplay of the two lunar cycles. Astronomers, or their ancient equivalent, would map the sky with obsessive precision, predicting eclipses, alignments, and conjunctions. These predictions would grant them enormous power, because to predict the future, even in this limited way, is to control it. Kings would consult them before going to war. Farmers would plant according to their guidance, and when a predicted event failed to occur, or when an unexpected event did occur, it would be seen as an omen, a sign that the gods were displeased or that the natural order had been disturbed. Religion too would be shaped by the two moons. Temples might be built to align with the rising of one moon or the other, or with the rare moments when both moons align. Priests might develop elaborate rituals timed to the lunar cycles, using the light of the moons to illuminate sacred spaces, to cast shadows that reveal hidden symbols, to create experiences of awe and transcendence. The architecture of these temples would reflect the duality of the moons, with twin towers, twin altars, twin pathways, representing the two celestial bodies and the balance between them. Even language would be affected. We might have two different words for night, one for nights lit by the larger moon, another for nights lit by the smaller, and a third for nights when both are present. We might have verbs that change form depending on which moon is visible, adjectives that describe the quality of moonlight in more nuanced ways. The grammar itself might encode the duality of the moons, reflecting a worldview where everything comes in pairs, where balance and opposition are fundamental principles of reality. And philosophy, that endless human attempt to make sense of existence, would grapple with the meaning of the two moons. Are they two aspects of the same thing, or are they fundamentally separate? Do they compete, or do they co-op? Is the universe built on duality, or is duality just an illusion, a surface appearance that conceals an underlying unity? These questions, inspired by the simple fact of two moons in the sky, would echo through centuries of thought, shaping not just cosmology but ethics, metaphysics, and even politics. Consider the concept of balance. In a world with one moon, balance might be a peripheral idea, something nice but not essential. But in a world with two moons, balance becomes central, because the two moons must balance each other, or else the system falls apart. Their gravitational pulls, their cycles, their positions in the sky, all of it must be calibrated, harmonized. And if the moons are balanced, then perhaps the world should be balanced. Perhaps societies should seek balance between opposing forces, between rulers and subjects, between labor and rest, between the individual and the community. The two moons become a model, a metaphor, a lesson written in the sky. Or consider the concept of time itself. In our world, with one moon, time is often seen as linear, a straight line from past to future. But in a world with two moons, time might be seen as cyclical, but in a more complex way, because the two moons create multiple cycles that intersect and overlap. There's the cycle of the larger moon, perhaps 29 days. There's the cycle of the smaller moon, perhaps 15 days. And then there's the meta-cycle, the time it takes for both moons to return to the same relative positions, which might be months or even years. Time in this worldview is not a line or a simple circle, it's a spiral, or a helix, or a web of interlocking cycles, each influencing the others, each marking different kinds of change. This might lead to a different sense of history, of destiny. Events might be seen as repeating, not exactly, but in patterns. The alignment of the two moons might mark a return to similar conditions, a moment when the past echoes in the present. Kings might look to the histories of previous alignments to guide their decisions, believing that what happened before will happen again, or that the lessons of the past are encoded in the celestial cycles. This could create a culture deeply attuned to history, to precedent, to the idea that nothing is truly new, that everything has happened before in some form. But it could also create a sense of fatalism, a belief that the future is written in the stars, or in this case the moon. If the cycles are predictable, if the alignments can be calculated, then perhaps human actions are also predictable, predetermined by forces beyond our control. This might stifle innovation, creativity, the willingness to take risks, or it might inspire a different kind of courage, the courage to act even in the face of an uncertain fate, to assert human will against the cold mechanics of the cosmos.
So when we imagine a world with two moons, we're not just imagining a different sky, we're imagining a different human experience, a different set of beliefs, values, and assumptions. The two moons would permeate every aspect of life, from the way we measure time to the way we understand ourselves, from the stories we tell children to the questions philosophers debate. And in recognizing this, we see how deeply we're shaped by our environment, how much of what seems natural and inevitable is actually contingent, the product of the specific conditions under which we evolved. Change those conditions, add a second moon, and everything changes with it. Now let's bring this back to the present, or at least to a version of the present. Let's imagine that we, here and now, with all our technology and science, suddenly discovered that Earth once had two moons, not as a hypothesis or a theory, but as a proven fact. The evidence is undeniable. We've found traces of the second moon in lunar rock samples, in gravitational anomalies, in ancient ice cores that preserve bubbles of air from a time when the sky was different. How would we respond? How would this knowledge change us? At first, there would be excitement. The scientific community would be electrified. Research grants would pour in. Telescopes would be redirected. Expeditions would be mounted to gather more evidence, to reconstruct the orbit of the lost moon, to determine when and how it merged with the larger one. There would be a race, not just to understand the mechanics of the event, but to find its fingerprints in the geological record, to see if we could trace the effects of the second moon on Earth's climate, on the evolution of life, on the development of the first ecosystem. But beyond the science, there would be something else, a sense of loss perhaps, because if Earth once had two moons, then we've lost something we never knew we had. The sky, which we thought was stable and unchanging, turns out to have a history. And that history includes a time when it was different, when it held more, when the night was lit by twin lights instead of one. It's a small loss in the grand scheme of things. We never knew the second moon, we never saw it rise but still there's something poignant about it, something that resonates with the human tendency to mourn what might have been. And there would be questions, lots of questions. Did the second moon affect the development of life? Did it delay or accelerate the emergence of complex organisms? Did it influence the evolution of early humans, shaping our ancestors in subtle ways? And if it did, then what does that mean for us? Are we in some small way shaped by a moon that no longer exists? Is there a ghost in our genetics, a trace of the double moon written into our DNA, invisible but still present? These questions wouldn't have easy answers, but they would change the way we think about ourselves, about our place in the cosmos. Because if the sky can change, if the moon we take for granted was once part of a pair, then nothing is as fixed as it seems. The world is more fluid, more contingent, more open to transformation than we like to believe. And in facing that, we might become more humble, more aware of our own fragility, more appreciative of the delicate balance that allows us to exist at all. There would also be a cultural reckoning. Myths about twin moons, which were once dismissed as fantasy, would suddenly be taken seriously. Researchers would comb through ancient texts, oral traditions, cave paintings, looking for any reference to a second moon, any hint that our ancestors remembered. And when they found them, and they would find them, there would be a re-evaluation of what we mean by myth. Maybe myths aren't just stories, maybe they're memories, distorted and layered over millennia, but memories nonetheless. Maybe the ancients knew more than we gave them credit for. This would raise uncomfortable questions about history, about knowledge, about the arrogance of modernity. We tend to assume that we know more than our ancestors, that science has given us a clearer, truer picture of the world, and in many ways that's correct. But what if there are things our ancestors knew that we've forgotten? What if there are truths embedded in their myths? Truths we've dismissed because we couldn't measure them, couldn't quantify them, couldn't fit them into our models. The discovery of the second moon would force us to reconsider, to approach the past with more humility, to recognize that knowledge can be lost as well as gained. And then there would be the artists, writers, filmmakers, musicians, all inspired by the idea of the double moon. They would create works that explore what it might have been like to live under that sky, to see those twin lights, to navigate a world shaped by their influence. Some of these works would be speculative, imagining alternate histories where the second moon never merged, where it still hangs in the sky today. Others would be elegiac, mourning the loss, reflecting on the transience of everything, the way even the sky can change and leave us with only echoes. And perhaps in the quiet moments, in the late hours when the distractions of the day have faded, and you're left alone with your thoughts, you might look up at the moon and see it differently, not just as a lifeless rock, but as a survivor, the last remnant of a system that was once more complex, more beautiful. You might imagine just for a moment what it would be like to see a second moon rising beside it. And in that imagining, you might feel a strange connection to the past, to a time when the sky was different, to a world that existed but is now gone. A reminder that change is constant, that nothing lasts forever, and that the world we think we know is only one chapter in a much longer, much stranger story. So the question, what if Earth had two moons, isn't just about astronomy or geology. It's about memory,
identity, meaning. It's about how we understand ourselves in relation to the cosmos, and how that understanding shifts when we learn that the cosmos itself has a history, that the sky we look up at every night is not eternal, but contingent, shaped by forces and events that we're only beginning to comprehend. The two moons, real or imagined, are a lens through which we can see our own world more clearly, a thought experiment that reveals the deep interconnectedness of all things, and a reminder that wonder, true wonder, comes not from certainty, but from the recognition that we live in a universe far stranger and more beautiful than we can ever fully grasp. Let's take one more step, one more turn in this spiral of thought. Let's ask not just what it would mean for humans but what it would mean for the universe, because Earth is not alone. There are countless worlds out there, orbiting distant stars, and some of them, statistically speaking, must have moons, and some of those worlds again statistically, must have 2 moons, or 3. So in imagining Earth with 2 moons, we're not just imagining an alternate version of our own planet, we're imagining a glimpse of what might be common out there, in the vast darkness, where other worlds spin and other skies hold patterns we've never seen. If we could visit one of these worlds, a planet circling a star, hundreds of light years away, and if that planet had 2 moons, what would it tell us? Because every world is an experiment, a unique configuration of mass, orbit, atmosphere and life, all interacting in ways that produce outcomes we can't always predict. A world with 2 moons is one kind of experiment, a world with 1 moon is another, a world with none, like Venus or Mars in its current state, is yet another. And by studying these different experiments, by comparing them, by seeing what they have in common and where they diverge, we learn something fundamental about how planets work, how life emerges, how complexity arises from simple rules. Perhaps, somewhere out there there's a planet with 2 moons where life has evolved differently than it did here. Maybe the creatures on that world have developed a sensitivity to multiple lunar cycles, an internal clock that responds to both moons, allowing them to navigate the complex tides, to time their reproduction, to migrate in patterns we've never seen. Maybe they've developed eyes that can see the subtle differences in the light of each moon, distinguishing between them in ways we can't imagine. Maybe they've built civilizations with calendars far more intricate than ours, with philosophies that embrace duality not as a problem but as the fundamental nature of reality. Or maybe on some worlds the presence of 2 moons has prevented the development of complex life. Maybe the tides are too chaotic, the climate too unstable, the gravitational stresses too severe. Maybe those worlds are dominated by simple organisms, bacteria and algae, unable to evolve beyond the most basic forms because the environment never stays stable long enough for complexity to take root. This too would teach us something. It would show us the limits of habitability, the fine line between conditions that foster life and conditions that suppress it. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there is a world with 2 moons, where intelligent life has emerged, looked up at their sky, and wondered the same things we're wondering now. Maybe they've asked, what if our planet had only 1 moon? Maybe they've imagined a simpler sky, a more predictable world, and wondered if they would still be who they are without the complexity of the double moon. Maybe they've told stories about a lost moon, or a moon that never was, and maybe those stories, like ours, carry within them a deeper truth, a recognition that the world is not fixed, that the sky is a canvas that can be painted in many different ways. In this sense, the question of the 2 moons is not just about Earth. It's about the nature of worlds, the diversity of possible configurations, the way that small changes in initial conditions can lead to vastly different outcomes. It's a reminder that the universe is not uniform, that each planet, each moon, each star system, is unique, and that by exploring these differences, by asking what if, we're not just satisfying curiosity, we're expanding the boundaries of what we think is possible. We're learning that the cosmos is far richer, far more varied, than we could have imagined from looking at our own small corner of it. And there's something humbling in that. We believed the stars revolved around us, that the sun and moon existed for our benefit, that we were special, unique, the pinnacle of creation. But every discovery we've made since then has pushed us further from that center. We're not at the center of the solar system. We're not at the center of the galaxy. We're not even in a particularly special part of the galaxy. And our planet, as wonderful as it is just one of billions, maybe trillions, each with its own story, its own moons, its own sky.
But here's the twist. In recognizing that we're not special, we also recognize that we're not alone. Somewhere out there, under a different sky, on a world with 2 moons, or 3 or none, there might be others looking up and asking the same questions we're asking. And even if we never meet them, even if the distances are too vast and the timescales too long, there's a connection, a shared sense of wonder, a shared recognition that the universe is a mystery, and that the act of questioning, of imagining, of reaching out toward the unknown, is what makes us conscious, what makes us alive. So as we bring this journey to a close, as we let the double moons set one last time on the horizon of imagination, we carry with us not answers, but questions. Questions about what might have been, what could be, what we've lost, and what we might still find. The 2 moons, whether they existed in Earth's past or exist only in the realm of thought, are a gift. They remind us that the world is not fixed, that the sky has a history, that change is the only constant, and they invite us to keep looking up, keep wondering, keep imagining, because the act of imagining is how we expand the boundaries of the possible, how we reach beyond the limits of what we know toward the infinite expanse of what we might one day understand. And so we arrive at the end of this quiet journey, this thought experiment that has taken us from the violent birth of the moon, through the slow dance of celestial mechanics, into the realm of myth and memory, and finally out into the cosmos itself. We've imagined a world with 2 moons, a sky split by twin lights, tides that rise and fall in complex rhythms, and a human culture shaped by the duality over. We've asked what it would mean, how it would change us, and what we might learn from imagining something so different from the world we know. But before we let the image fade, before we return to the single moon that hangs in our own night sky, let's take one more moment to simply be there, to stand on that imagined beach, to feel the cool sand beneath our feet, to listen to the waves with their strange layered rhythm, and to look up at those 2 luminous bodies as they climb higher into the darkness. Let's not analyze them, not question them, not try to understand them. Let's just see them. Let's just feel what it would be like to live in a world where the night is never quite as simple as we thought it should be. The larger moon is bright, so bright it casts sharp shadows on the sand. You can see your own shadow stretching behind you, dark and distant. But there's another shadow too, fainter, offset by a few degrees, cast by the smaller moon. The 2 shadows overlap but don't quite match, creating a ghostly double image that shifts as you move. It's disorienting at first, this doubling, but after a while it becomes oddly comforting. It's as if the world is acknowledging that nothing is singular, that everything has a twin, a reflection, a counterpart. The air is still, but you can feel something moving through it, a kind of energy, subtle but undeniable. Maybe it's just the combined gravitational pull of the 2 moons, too faint for human senses to detect directly, but still there, still exerting its influence. Or maybe it's something else, something psychological, the way the mind responds to a sky that's different from the one it's used to. Whatever it is, it makes the night feel alive in a way that's hard to describe. Not threatening, not welcoming, just alive, present, aware. You sit down on the sand and let your eyes adjust to the double moonlight. After a while you start to notice things you wouldn't see under a single moon. The way the light catches on the crest of a wave, creating 2 separate highlights, one silver, one slightly bluer. The way the shadows of the dunes ripple and shift as the moons move across the sky. The way the stars, still visible despite the brightness, seem to arrange themselves differently, as if they're responding to the presence of the 2 moons, aligning into new patterns, new constellations that no human has ever named. And then, just for a moment, you imagine what it would be like if this were real, if you could step out of your own world and into this one, where the sky holds 2 moons and the night is never quite as dark, never quite as simple. Would you feel at home here, or would there always be a sense of wrongness, a feeling that something is off, that the sky is not as it should be? It's hard to say, but maybe, after enough time, after enough nights spent under those twin lights, you would adjust. And when you looked up, you wouldn't see strangeness, you would see beauty, you would see home, because that's what we do. We adapt.
We make sense of whatever world we find ourselves in, no matter how different it is from what we expected. We find patterns in chaos, meaning in randomness, home in the unfamiliar, and the sky, no matter how many moons it holds, becomes the sky we know, the sky we love, the sky that watches over us as we sleep. So as the two moons climb higher, as they move toward their zenith and the beach is bathed in that strange doubled light, you lie back on the sand and close your eyes. The sound of the waves is soothing, even with its complex rhythm. The cool breeze brushes against your skin, and somewhere above you, the two moons continue their dance, each following its own path, each casting its own light, each a reminder that the world is larger, stranger, and more beautiful than we can ever fully understand. Now let's leave that imagined beach, and return to our own world, our own sky, our own single moon. But don't let go of the image entirely. Keep it somewhere in the back of your mind, a reminder of what could have been, what might still be out there, what we might discover if we keep looking, keep wondering, keep asking questions, because the question of the two moons, as we've seen, is not just about astronomy. It's about perspective. It's about recognizing that the world we take for granted is only one possibility among many, and that by imagining other possibilities, we see our own world more clearly. We appreciate its quirks, its contingencies, its fragile balance, and we remember that nothing, not even the sky, is permanent. Everything changes, everything evolves, everything has a history, even the things that seem most eternal. The moon, our moon, the one we see every night, is a survivor. It's the last remnant of a violent collision that nearly destroyed the Earth. It's been battered by asteroids, scorched by the sun, tugged at by the Earth's gravity for billions of years, and yet it endured. It continues to orbit, to reflect the sun's light, to pull at our oceans, to inspire our myths and our dreams. It's been a constant presence throughout human history, a silent witness to everything we've done, everything we've become, but it wasn't always alone. Once, for a brief period in Earth's deep past, it had a companion, a smaller moon, a twin, a sibling, and though that companion is gone, merged into the surface of the larger moon, its presence is still felt, in the highlands of the far side, in the chemical signatures of lunar rock, in the myths that speak of lost moons and fallen lights. The second moon is not entirely lost. It's transformed, integrated, absorbed into the larger story of the moon itself, and maybe that's the real lesson here. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything leaves a trace, no matter how faint, no matter how hard it is to detect. The second moon is gone, but it's also still here, written into the landscape of the moon, embedded in the stories we tell, present in the questions we ask. And in recognizing that, we recognize something about ourselves. We too are made of traces. We carry within us the history of our ancestors, the memories of our past, the echoes of every experience we've ever had. We're not singular, isolated beings. We're accumulations, layers upon layers, shaped by forces we can't always see but can always feel. So when you look up at the moon tonight, or tomorrow night, or any night, try to see it not just as a single object, but as a story that stretches back billions of years, that includes violence and creation, collision and merger, loss and transformation. And remember that the sky, like us, has a history. It's not fixed. It's not unchanged. It's a record of everything that's happened, everything that's been, everything that might still be. And if you close your eyes and imagine hard enough, maybe you'll see it, the ghost of the second moon, rising beside the first, casting its faint light across the world. It won't be real, not in any physical sense, but it will be true, in a deeper way, true to the history of the Earth, true to the myths we've told, true to the sense that the world is always more than what we see, that there are layers beneath layers, moons behind moons, stories within stories. Now as we drift toward sleep, toward that other kind of darkness, let's take the image of the two moons with us. Let them be the last thing you see before your eyes close, the last thought before thought itself dissolves into dream. Let them hang there in the space between waking and sleeping, those twin lights, those silent witnesses, those reminders that the universe is vast, complex and full of possibilities we've only begun to explore. Maybe in your dreams tonight, You'll walk on that beach again. You'll feel the sand beneath your feet, hear the waves with their strange rhythm, see the double shadows stretching across the ground, and you'll look up and there they'll be, the two moons hanging in the sky like a question that doesn't need an answer, like a mystery that's content to remain unsolved, like a story that's happy just to be told. And when you wake, when the morning light filters through your window and the night has passed, you'll remember, not the details maybe, not the exact words or the precise images, but the sense that you've been somewhere different, somewhere strange and beautiful, somewhere that exists only in the space between imagination and reality. And you'll carry that feeling with you through the day, a quiet reminder that the world is not as fixed as it seems, that the sky has a history, and that every night when the moon rises it's not just a moon, it's a story, and you're part of that story whether you know it or not. The two moons have set now, the beach is empty, the waves continue their endless rhythm, rising and falling, with or without the light of the moon, with or without anyone to see them. And somewhere in the deep past, or the far future, in an alternate reality, or a distant world, those two moons still exist. They're still dancing across the sky, still casting their doubled light, still shaping the tides and the days and the dreams of whoever is there to witness them. But for now, for this moment, we have one moon. Our moon, the familiar pale disk that we've looked up at for as long as humans have existed. And that's enough. It's more than enough. Because even a single moon is a miracle. A reminder that we live on a planet that's not alone. That's held in the gravitational embrace of another world. That's part of a system far larger and more intricate than we can fully comprehend. So let the image of the two moons fade into the background, into the realm of dreams and possibilities. Let your breathing slow, your thoughts quiet, your body relax into the softness of wherever you are. The night is here, and somewhere above you, whether you can see it or not, the moon is rising. Just the one, our moon, and it's watching over you as it has watched over everything, for billions of years. A silent witness, a steady presence, a light in the darkness. Sleep now, traveler, sleep beneath the single moon, and dream of the one that might have been. Dream of the twin lights, the doubled shadows, the complex tides. Dream of the myths and the memories, the lost civilizations and the distant worlds. Dream of a sky that's different, and wake to one that's familiar. Because both are real, in their own way. Both are part of the story, and you, by imagining, by wondering, by asking what if, are keeping that story alive. The two moons were here once, they might be here again, somewhere, but for now they live in the space between what was and what could be. In the quiet corners of the mind where imagination meets memory, where science meets story, where the known world touches the edge of the unknown. And that's where they'll stay, waiting, patient, luminous like two lights in the darkness, like two questions in the silence, like two moons in a sky that holds more than we can see but less than we can imagine. And so the night deepens. The story ends, or rather it pauses, waiting to be told again, waiting to be remembered. The beach is empty now. The moons have set. The waves continue their ancient rhythm. And you, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever sky hangs above you, you are part of this, part of the wondering, part of the imagining, part of the long, slow conversation between humans and the cosmos. A conversation that began when the first person looked up at the moon and asked, "What is that? Where did it come from? And what does it mean?"
The answers are still unfolding. They always will be. But the questions are eternal. And tonight, we've added one more. Thinking, what if Earth had two moons? It's a simple question, but like all the best questions, it opens into something much larger, much deeper, much more profound. It opens into the nature of worlds, the diversity of possibilities, the way that small changes ripple outward, shaping everything they touch. It opens into our own history, our own myths, our own sense of who we are, and where we came from. And it opens into the future, into the worlds we might one day visit, the skies we might one day see, the moons that might one day rise over horizons we can't yet imagine. So carry the question with you. Let it drift alongside you as you drift toward sleep. Let it be a companion, a quiet presence, A reminder that the universe is full of wonders we've barely begun to explore. And let the two moons, real or imagined, be a symbol of that wonder, a beacon in the darkness, a light that guides us, not toward certainty, but toward curiosity, not toward answers, but toward more questions, not toward the end of the story, but toward its continuation. The world is quiet, and somewhere, in a sky we can only imagine, two moons are rising. They cast their doubled light across a world that's not quite ours but not quite alien either. A world that exists for now, only in the space between thought and dream, between science and story, between the single moon we know and the double moon we wonder about. Rest now, let go, let the image dissolve, let the questions fade, let yourself sink into the softness of sleep, into the gentle darkness that waits for us all at the end of the day. Because the moon, whether there are one or two, will still be there when you wake. The sky will still be there. The world will still be there. And so will the question. Always the questions. Always the wondering. Always the sense that there's more to see, more to know, more to imagine. Sleep well, traveler. Dream of the moons. And when you wake, look up, not at the sky as you think it should be, but at the sky as it is. See it with fresh eyes, with wonder, with gratitude, because even a single moon is a miracle, and the fact that we can look up and see it, that we can ask questions about it, that we can imagine other possibilities, that too is a miracle. The two moons have set, the story is told, the night is deep, and you, wherever you are part of it all, part of the earth, part of the sky, part of the long unfolding story of a universe that's far stranger, and far more beautiful than we can ever fully understand. The stars will keep their watch, and the universe will keep spinning, slowly, endlessly, carrying us all through the darkness toward whatever dawn awaits. Good night. But wait, before we fully surrender to sleep, before the last traces of thought dissolve into the formless realm of dreams, let's linger just a little longer in this space between waking and sleeping, between the world as it is and the world as it might have been, because there are still threads to follow, still questions to explore, still layers of meaning hidden beneath the surface of the two moons story. And in this quiet hour, when the mind is relaxed and open, when the rigid boundaries of daytime thinking have softened, we might find connections we missed before, insights that emerge only when we stop trying so hard to understand and simply allow ourselves to wonder. Let's return to the science, but approach it differently this time, not with equations and measurements, but with a sense of awe at the elegance of the universe's design, at the way seemingly random events can produce outcomes of startling beauty and complexity. Because the story of how the moon formed, and how it might have briefly had a companion, is not just a story about rocks and gravity. It's a story about transformation, about creation emerging from destruction, about the way the universe takes chaos and slowly, patiently, shapes it into order. Think about it. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was a hellish place. The surface was molten, volcanic activity was constant, the atmosphere was toxic, and the temperature was high enough to vaporize metal. This was not a world that looked remotely habitable, not a world where you could imagine life, let alone complex life, let alone civilizations that would one day look up at the sky and wonder about their place in the cosmos. And yet, buried within that chaos were the seeds of everything that would come after. The collision with Theia, the Mars-sized object that struck the Earth in a glancing blow, was catastrophic. It nearly destroyed both bodies. The impact generated enough energy to melt the entire surface of the Earth, to send plumes of vaporized rock shooting into space, to create a debris field that stretched thousands of kilometers around the young planet. For a brief moment, Earth wasn't a solid world. It was a cloud, a ring of molten droplets, and superheated gas, spinning chaotically around a core that was itself barely holding together. But out of that chaos, something remarkable happened. The debris didn't just scatter into space. It stayed in orbit, held by Earth's gravity, and over time the individual particles began to collide, to stick together, to accumulate into larger and larger clumps. This process, called accretion, is the same process that formed the planets themselves, but here it was happening on a much faster timescale,
compressed into perhaps a few thousand years instead of millions. The largest clumps attracted more material, growing faster than their smaller neighbors, and eventually one clump became so massive that it began to dominate the others, sweeping up everything in its path. This became the moon, but the accretion process isn't perfectly efficient. Some material escaped, some fell back to Earth, and some formed smaller clumps that weren't quite massive enough to merge with the main body. These smaller clumps might have persisted for a while, orbiting the Earth alongside the larger moon, miniature satellites in their own right. Most of these smaller bodies would have been short-lived. Their orbits would have been unstable, perturbed by the gravitational influence of the larger moon, and they would have either fallen into the moon, fallen into the Earth, or been ejected into space. But if one of them was in just the right orbit, if it found a stable or semi-stable path that kept it safe from these fates, it might have lasted longer. It might have become the second moon, the companion we've been imagining. The existence of this second moon would have been temporary. The simulations show that sooner or later, its orbit would decay, bringing it closer to the larger moon, until eventually, inevitably, they collided. But temporary in geological terms can still mean millions of years. Millions of years when the Earth had two moons, when the sky was different, when the tides followed a more complex rhythm. Millions of years when, if there had been eyes to see it, someone could have looked up and witnessed a spectacle that's now lost to time. And here's where the story becomes almost poetic. Because when the two moons finally collided, it wasn't a violent explosive event, it was slow, gentle, almost tender. The smaller moon's orbit had decayed to the point where it was moving at almost the same speed as the larger moon, and when they finally touched, they didn't shatter each other. They merged. The smaller moon's surface flowed over the larger moon's, covering one hemisphere, the far side, with a layer of crust that's slightly different in composition, slightly different in structure. The collision created the highlands, the rugged, mountainous terrain that makes the far side so different from the near side.
In other words, the second moon didn't disappear, it was absorbed. It became part of the larger moon, integrated into its structure, its history, its very substance. And in that sense, it's still there. Every time we look at the moon, we're looking at both moons, the larger one that we call the moon, and the smaller one that merged with it billions of years ago. They're one now, inseparable. But if you know where to look, if you know how to read the landscape, you can still see the traces of that ancient union. This idea of integration, of two becoming one, resonates beyond just planetary science. It's a metaphor that echoes through biology, psychology, culture, because nothing in the universe exists in pure isolation. Everything is connected, everything influences everything else, and over time, things that were once separate often merge, integrate, become part of a larger whole. Species evolve through the merging of genetic material. Cultures blend and exchange ideas. Even our own minds, our sense of self, is not a singular thing, but a collection of different processes, different voices, different aspects that somehow come together to create the illusion of a unified consciousness. The two moons in this light become a symbol of integration, of the way the universe takes diversity and weaves it into unity. They started as separate objects, products of the same catastrophic event, but distinct, individual, and over time, they came together, not through force, but through the gentle, inevitable pull of gravity, and what emerged was something new, something that carried traces of both, but was also more than the sum of its parts. The moon as we know it, with its near side and far side, its Maria and highlands, is a product of that merging. It's a two-moon entity, even though we only see it as one, and perhaps this is true of us as well. Perhaps we too are the product of mergings we've forgotten, of integrations that happened so long ago we don't even realize they occurred. Our genetic code carries the traces of ancient viruses that merged with our ancestors' DNA. Our languages carry words borrowed from cultures that no longer exist. Our ideas, our beliefs, our entire way of seeing the world is built on foundations laid by people we've never met, insights we've never consciously acknowledged. We're not singular beings, we're mosaics, collections of traces, integrations of countless influences that have shaped us over time. The two moons remind us of this. They remind us that separation is often temporary, that boundaries are porous, that the universe tends toward integration, toward connection, toward the weaving together of things that were once apart. And in recognizing this, we might find a different way of relating to the world, a way that's less about defending our individuality and more about embracing our interconnectedness, less about maintaining rigid boundaries and more about allowing ourselves to be shaped by the things we encounter, the people we meet, the ideas we explore. Now let's shift perspective one more time. Let's imagine not the distant past, but the far future. Because the story of the moon and the story of the two moons is not over. It's still unfolding. The moon is still orbiting the Earth, still exerting its gravitational influence, still slowly drifting away from us at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters per year. This is happening because of tidal forces, the same forces that create the ocean tide. The moon's gravity creates a bulge in the Earth's oceans, and as the Earth rotates, this bulge gets dragged ahead of the moon, pulling the moon forward in its orbit and gradually increasing its distance from Earth. This process has been going on for billions of years, and it will continue for billions more. Eventually, millions of years in the future, the moon will be so far away that it will no longer dominate the night sky as it does now. It will be smaller, fainter, a distant light rather than a close companion. The tides will be weaker, the night will be darker, and the Earth's rotation will have slowed even more, stretching the day to perhaps 30 or 40 hours. But before that happens, something else might occur. Because the Earth is not the only body in the solar system, and the moon is not immune to outside influence, there are asteroids, comets, objects wandering through the inner solar system, and any one of them could in theory strike the moon or be captured by Earth's gravity and become a new satellite. The chances of this happening in any given year are vanishingly small, but over millions or billions of years the probabilities add up. Imagine then, a future scenario. A large asteroid, perhaps tens of kilometers across, approaches the Earth-Moon system. Most likely it would pass by harmlessly, continuing on its way through space. But if the trajectory is just right, if the gravitational interactions align perfectly, the asteroid might be captured, slowed down enough that it doesn't escape but not so much that it crashes. It would enter an orbit around the Earth, becoming in effect a new moon. At first, this new moon would be irregular, its orbit eccentric, its path unpredictable. But over time, the tidal forces from Earth and the gravitational influence of the original moon would stabilize it, circularize its orbit, bring it into a more regular pattern. And if it survived, if it didn't collide with the moon or fall into the Earth, it might persist for millions of years, giving the Earth once again two moons. This future Earth would be a strange place. The original moon would be much farther away than it is now, smaller in the sky, less bright. But the new moon, depending on its size and orbit, might be close, large, dramatic. The two moons would create complex tides again, but different from the ones we've been imagining, because the original moon's influence would be weaker and the new moon stronger. The night sky would be even more varied, with some nights lit by one moon, some by the other, and some by both. And the humans of that future, if they still exist, would have a different relationship with their sky than we do. They would remember the time when there was only one moon, just as we remember, or try to remember, the time when there might have been two. They would tell stories about the arrival of the second moon, about what it meant, what it changed, what omens or blessings it brought. And they would look up at their double moon sky and see it as normal, as natural, as the way things have always been, even though their ancestors knew a different sky. This is the nature of time. It transforms everything. What once was becomes what is, and what is will become what was. The moon, which formed from a violent collision, which perhaps briefly had a companion, which has been our constant companion for billions of years, will one day be distant and faint, and perhaps in that future, a new moon will arrive, and the cycle will begin again. The universe is full of these cycles, these risings and settings, these mergings and separations. Nothing is permanent, but nothing is truly lost either. And so, as we drift deeper into this thought experiment, as we let the images of moons and tides and ancient collisions wash over us,
We're not just learning about the past, or speculating about the future. We're touching something fundamental about the nature of existence itself, the impermanence of things, the way everything flows, changes, becomes something else. The moon was once part of the earth. It broke away, became separate, and now it's slowly drifting back toward a kind of separation that might in the far future lead to a new kind of integration or a new kind of loss. We too are part of this flow. We were once not here, and someday we will not be here again. But in between, in this brief window of existence, we get to witness, to experience, to wonder. We get to look up at the moon and ask questions about it. We get to imagine scenarios, to explore possibilities, to feel the awe of living in a universe that's so much larger and stranger than our everyday experience suggests. This is the gift of consciousness, of awareness. Not that we have answers, but that we can ask questions. Not that we understand everything, but that we can wonder about it. And in wondering, we connect with something timeless, because humans have been looking up at the moon for as long as humans have existed. They've wondered about it, told stories about it, used it to navigate, to mark time, to inspire myths and dreams. And we're doing the same thing, just with more knowledge, more tools, more ways of asking the questions. But the fundamental act, the act of looking up and wondering, is it's a thread that connects us to our ancestors and to our descendants. A shared human experience that transcends time and culture. So when we ask, what if Earth had two moons? We're participating in that ancient tradition of wonder. We're taking the thing we see in the sky and asking, what if it were different? What would that mean? And in asking that question, we're not just satisfying curiosity, we're exercising our humanity. We're using the unique capacity of the human mind to imagine, to hypothesize, to explore possibilities that don't currently exist, but might have existed or might exist somewhere else. This is what makes us human. Not our technology, not our cities, not even our language. It's our ability to wonder, to imagine, to ask, what if? And the universe rewards this wondering, because every time we ask a question, we open a door. We might not find the answer we were looking for. We might find something entirely different. But we always find something. We always learn something new, discover some new connection, some new way of seeing the world. The question about the two moons has led us through physics, biology, mythology. It's shown us how the sky shapes the land, how the land shapes life, how life shapes culture, how culture shapes our understanding of ourselves. One question, branching into countless others, each one opening into new territories of thought.
This is the beauty of science, but it's also the beauty of imagination. They're not opposites, they're partners. Science gives us the tools to test our imaginings, to see which ones correspond to reality, and which ones remain in the realm of fantasy. But imagination gives us the space to generate those ideas in the first place, to conceive of possibilities we haven't yet seen, to ask questions we haven't yet thought to ask. And together science and imagination create a way of engaging with the world that's both rigorous and creative, both grounded and transcendent. The two moons, whether they existed or not, whether they will exist again or not, serve as a focal point for this engagement. They're a lens through which we can examine our world, our history, our future. They're a thought experiment that reveals truths about the nature of reality, the contingency of existence, the beauty of complexity. And they're a story, a narrative we can tell ourselves and each other, a way of making sense of the vast impersonal forces that shape the universe. Stories are how we understand things, not just intellectually, but emotionally, intuitively. We can read all the scientific papers, all the data, all the equations, but until we can tell a story about it, until we can weave it into a narrative that has characters and events and meaning, it doesn't fully sink in. The story of the two moons, the way we've told it tonight, is a way of making the abstract concrete, of turning numbers and theories into something we can feel, something that resonates with our experience of being alive, of being conscious, of being part of this strange and wonderful universe. And now, as we near the true end of this journey, as the last grains of wakefulness slip away and sleep beckons more insistently, let's allow the story to settle. Let's stop trying to analyze or understand,
and simply let the images rest in our minds. The two moons rising over a beach, the doubled shadows on the sand, the complex rhythm of the waves, the ancient collision that brought them into being. All of these images, all of these ideas floating freely now, no longer bound by logic or sequence, just drifting like motes of light in the darkness. This is the space where sleep begins, not in the sudden switching off of consciousness, but in the gradual dissolution of structure, the softening of boundaries, the blending of thought and dream. The two moons become part of that blending. They're no longer a scientific question or a thought experiment. They're just an image, a feeling, a gentle presence in the dimming landscape of the mind. And in that dimness, in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, something shifts. The distinction between real and imagined, between what was and what might have been, begins to blur. The moon we know and the moon we vive in become the same thing. The sky of our world and the sky of the alternate world merge, and for just a moment, just a breath, just a heartbeat, we exist in both places at once. We stand on our familiar earth, looking up at our familiar moon, but we also stand on that imagined beach, looking up at those imagined twin lights, and both are real, both are true. It's also what could exist, what we can conceive of, what we can hold in our minds and hearts. This is the power of imagination. It doesn't just entertain us, it expands. It shows us that the boundaries we think are solid are actually permeable, that the world we think is fixed is actually fluid, that the limits we think are absolute are actually negotiable. The two moons, imagined but felt, remind us that we are not prisoners of reality, we are participants in it. We shape it as much as it shapes us, through our thoughts, our dreams, our questions, our stories. And so, as the night deepens and the pull of sleep becomes irresistible, as the last thoughts scatter like stars and the darkness welcomes us into its embrace, let's carry this with us. The knowledge that the sky has a history, the recognition that what seems eternal is actually transient, the awareness that change is constant, that integration is ongoing, that the universe is always in motion, always transforming, always becoming something new. And let's carry too the image of the two moons, those twin lights, those silent companions, those reminders that the world is larger and stranger and more beautiful than we often remember. Sleep now. Let the moon set. Let the story dissolve. Let yourself sink into the softness, the warmth, the gentle darkness. The universe will keep spinning. The moon will keep orbiting. The tides will keep rising and falling. And somewhere in some corner of the cosmos we can't yet see, two moons might be rising right now, casting their doubled light across a world we'll never visit, witnessed by beings we'll never meet. But it doesn't matter. Because we've imagined it, we've wondered about it, we've allowed ourselves to see it, if only in our minds. And that act of imagining, that act of wondering, connects us to everything. To every world, every moon, every mind that has ever looked up at the sky and asked, what is that? What does it mean, and what if things were different? Rest now, traveler. The two moons will be there when you wake, not in the sky but in your memory, in your imagination, in that quiet place where the mind keeps the things it treasures. And they will remind you always that the universe is vast, that reality is flexible, and that wonder, true wonder, is not just about what we know but about what we can dream. Good night. Sleep well, and may your dreams be lit by twin lights, by doubled shadows, by the gentle eternal dance of moons we've known and moons we've imagined. The night is here, and you, dear listener, are part of it all now and always, beneath one moon or two, in this world or another, in waking or in sleep.